Hello and welcome to my Mars Mantra podcast. In today's podcast, I bring to you my mentor, Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed. And Dr. Iftekhar, he's known as Dr. Iftekhar or Ifti Ahmed. He used to be my professor at university. I met him in my last year of architecture thesis when I was doing housing project in rural areas. And I was lucky that he came back from his PhD and then helped me a lot. And not only in my thesis, he also helped me to kickstart my career in development. Iftekhar sir, how are you?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, good morning to you. I'm fine and from beautiful Newcastle in Australia.
Yes, and Dr. Iftekhar is now teaching at Newcastle University in disaster risks and resilience. And today we are going to start talking about his journey, how it all started, because we both studied architecture, but we both pursued a career in development. And that's why he is my mentor. So please tell us how you started your journey in this sector.
Okay, yes, firstly, thank you, Rumana, for inviting me to this session. And the journey is actually a very long one, and I don't want to start with the cliche like a rolling stone gathers no moss, but I have been kind of rolling along and I have gathered moss in terms of knowledge. The way all this started, I studied architecture in India, and towards the later part of my studies, I started getting influenced by many writings of people. There was a very famous Iranian architect called Nadir Khaledi who started talking about building with mud and local resources, and that started inspiring me and started to look at how people built houses and other kinds of structures in rural areas of Bangladesh. And I'm originally from Bangladesh, as Rumana perhaps mentioned right at the beginning. So that is the issue. So that's the starting point. I think it's my end of bachelor's of architecture when I was studying in India. Subsequently, I started exploring a lot of work building with mud and earth, and at some point people started calling me mud because of my interest in mud. And I then ended up in doing a PhD, a master's, sorry, in the United States, looking at mud architecture in Bangladesh, culminating in a book called Up to the Waist in Mud, published in 1994. Gosh, that makes me feel old. But yeah, in any case, so that kind of started the journey. But then I went back to the UK for a PhD degree. And at that time, I was still interested in rural housing, but I started broadening out because I started realizing that rural housing is, in particularly in a context like Bangladesh, is vulnerable to disasters of all kinds, exposed to natural hazards, you name it, floods, cyclones, and so on. So that started spurring my interest in the field of disaster risk reduction and shelter housing. And subsequently, I started working. Then I went back to Bangladesh after finishing my PhD, and that's when I connected with Rumana, who was just about to finish her studies at BUET in architecture. And so, luckily, at that point, I managed to get some research projects, and I'll talk a bit about those action research projects that I did. And Rumana and some other fellow students were interested in joining me to work in villages, and that's how we started our journey, which I will be talking about. And subsequently, we moved on to different domains, but kind of held closely to our heart that experience that we had at that particular time in the early 2000s in rural areas of Bangladesh, and we still work in that area. One thing I should also mention in passing, at that time, architects, and even now to a large extent, were busy catering to the urban elite and people who were wealthy enough to employ the services. But we realized that the bulk of the buildings, housing particularly in countries like Bangladesh, bulk means 90%, more than 90% is built by people themselves, and large portion of those people actually live in villages or urban informal settlements. So we kind of wanted to shift our attention to this domain as built environment professionals, as architects. So we kind of started defining our journey in terms of development, but I think much more like para architects, if that's the word for it, not the typical architects catering to the wealthy. So I think some of us carried that, and now things are changing. Climate change and the increasing impact of disasters, globalization, and urbanization, all these kind of factors have combined, and people are much more aware of the needs of people on the ground. And so there is a much more concerted movement, and it is not so strange to in countries like Bangladesh to see architects working in this particular domain. But in the early 2000s, we were the oddballs at that time, if that's the word for it. Right? Is that
Yes.
enough of a preamble, Rumana?
No, this is really good that you mentioned how it was. And we kept quiet because we know that people don't understand us. And even when I started my career, because I know what I wanted to do, but it was hard to get into the sector, get a job, and kickstart the career. And my family was saying, "Oh, if you don't get a job, just come back to Bangladesh." But finally, tsunami happened, and I was lucky to start my career. And I think same happened with you. You also worked in Bangladesh after the flood with UN. Tell us what happened there.
Oh yeah, okay. So that was very soon after we did these projects in Bangladesh, Rumana and Gang. And then there was a massive flood in 2004, and I started building up a small reputation. So the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, they had a shelter program, shelter reconstruction recovery program after the floods, and they appointed me as a shelter specialist, which was a very interesting experience. I can talk in length about that, but just to quickly say that I did not behave as an architect does. For example, in that shelter recovery project, we built more than 16,000 houses in 23 flood affected districts in Bangladesh. And I didn't provide a house design because I shied away from this whole notion of this one size fits all prototype design. People build homes according to their needs, their circumstances, their context, their climate, and so on. So what I did was that I insisted on having specifications so that the houses, whatever they build with local materials, should be of good quality. Like, for example, they should use good quality corrugated iron sheets so that if they fly off, they don't kill people. Simple things like that. So that was my approach towards it, and we managed to do quite a bit. And then, of course, slowly the reputation kind of spreads. And the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center in Thailand, they headhunted me and offered me a position. So that was my beginning of moving away from Bangladesh and working a bit more regionally and eventually globally. And then that kind of, again, the Rolling Stone proverb is that I eventually ended up in Australia, in different places, in Melbourne for many years. And in Melbourne, I did exactly what I wanted to do in my whole life. And you can read my book, Sustainable Housing and Construction, which talks about this kind of experience after disasters in six different countries, including both developed and developing countries. So and then for the last 10 years, I've been at the University of Newcastle, giving leadership to the Master of Disasters and Sustainable Development program and also the Disaster and Development Research Group. So that this program is unique. It is supported by the United Nations, but we again don't talk about top end things. We talk about vulnerability. We talk about people who are marginalized, even in countries like Australia, for that matter. So yeah, I think that's another additional addendum of a preamble, if that's the way to express it.
This is it. We see a lot of change over the last 20 years because so far we all looked, the whole global mindset was looking at development means, oh, yeah, poor countries. And yeah, the so called third world, the language I really hate to use. But
Mm-hmm.
now there is no first world and third world. All countries are going to suffer from disasters. And you've worked in Australia on that as well. So it will be good for us to understand the whole global context. And if you want to share your presentations, yes, I'm just leaving it up to you to tell us the story, how what will
Yeah.
happen.
Well, today I'll kind of focus on the work we did and a bit of a retrospection of that work. Look, the Australian context and globally what is happening, it deserves a whole different discussion. I think
Exactly.
particularly what's happening with the United States and how it's influencing many countries around the world to change their positions on climate change, disaster risk reduction, and helping people who are marginal and vulnerable. And Australia, I see that in many places already, people cannot, build homes after they have a disaster because they are insured adequately, and the insurance sector takes, rips them off basically, and the government doesn't really support them. And increasingly globally, this paradigm has shifted. At one point, if you look at the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, there was a lot of generous funding from around the world for the recovery construction. Now, not so. Now there are new paradigms coming up, self shelter, self recovery, that kind of stuff, because agencies, international NGOs don't have access to that kind of funding to be able to go and build homes for people. So people have to help themselves, and perhaps in a way that's good. It kind of builds up their resilience and their own capacity, but at the same time, it is a very fragile situation.
Yes, and especially because of so much conflict and war going on around the world, the agenda is shifting to that direction rather than climate change and development.
Yes, yes, the funding actually is just being channeled in that sector, and
Exactly.
huge demand for it. Someone
So,
just
should,
asked me just a recent earthquake in Afghanistan, and what's going to happen with the recovery there. Now, foreign governments won't fund Afghanistan. Your country, Rumana, the UK, doesn't want to fund Afghanistan because they think that if the money goes to the Taliban, they'll use it for their own agenda. So, and it won't go to the people who need it the most. So, things like that. So, how do these people recover? There is need for recovery, and not everyone is the Taliban in Afghanistan. Because there are people who are simple people who live in villages and get on with their lives and pursue agricultural or other kind of pursuits. So, it's a very difficult time now, and with this, I think the global inequality is just growing each and every day, and the disparity is just making it much more difficult for people who are or have been vulnerable for a long time, and they're going to get steeped into a long-term cycle of vulnerability.
and you also wanted to share your presentation, and you've also worked in Bangladesh. We talked about conflict, and Bangladesh is facing a big influx of refugees from Myanmar. So I would really like to know what you have done there.
Well, I didn't do so much as I would like to because I'm based in Australia, but I was fortunate to be able to work on a project looking at the Bhashanchar resettlement program, which is, just to give a little preamble, there are approximately 1.1 million Rohingya refugees just who fled from surrounding country, Myanmar, because of oppression of all kinds, and then they have been staying in shanty towns, basically camps in the Cox's Bazar district. And the government of Bangladesh, previous government rather, took on board this mission of resettling them in an isolated island, not so different from the what you call them refugee camps in refugee detention centers in countries like Australia, when people are put on Christmas Island, for example, or other Manus Islands offshore. So they kind of followed that kind of model and put those people there, and they built these kind of facilities. And when we looked at those facilities, you see the design is awful. They are regimental barracks, small rooms of 12 by 14 feet for a family of five or so. It's just impossible to have any kind of privacy. There are all kinds of problems with women's privacy. It's a conservative Muslim community, and a whole range of problems. Then you start finding out who the designers were. The designer is actually based in the UK and went ahead and has got no idea. There's no concept of co-designing and working with communities, which is why I wanted to talk about this participatory paradigm today, which is so lacking in the practice of most built-in run restaurants around the world.
That is very sad because, yeah, it is still top-down process when it comes to big projects. But there were some good stories I presented in one of the episodes that with my colleagues from Bangladesh, where World Bank supported the government of Bangladesh on community-led housing and infrastructure. So there are hopes. I hope we don't want to. Yes, we don't want to be too critical because we want to show the good examples, what's
Yes.
happening, and what can we learn from them.
Well, interestingly, Rumana, now that you say it, this Bhashanchar project was under the Astrayan program of the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina. Now, the Astrayan program has many different projects, and you have seen it together with me when we were doing our field work in Bangladesh. Those were not great because they were located in very distant, remote areas. People couldn't, survive there. But later on, I saw one project in Gopalganj not very long ago, just the same time when I went to Bhasanchar. Those were very good, actually. Nicely built homes with all kinds of services close to urban centers and other areas where they could get jobs. And the houses were well built, moderate design, moderate size, and people were reasonably happy. So they have that experience. And why did they have to build such bad stuff in Bhasanchar when they already? So they could learn from their own experiences, the good examples, and transfer that experience instead of kind of forcing something very alien onto the people. So there was that opportunity to learn, and yes, they are good examples, and those good examples should be utilized as lessons for the future.
Yes, that's why I really admire that you are writing and documenting all the work around the world. And I think Professor Ian Davis, who used to be teacher for both of us from Oxford Brookes and who was presented in episode one, his interview, he mentioned that you are now one of the top writers in this sector about all the disaster recovery. So it's really important for our listeners to know about all the things happening and also read the writing of Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed.
That's great. Thank you very much. I have sent you a list of books, Umana, and I'm more than
Yeah.
happy for you to share them with everyone.
Yes, we will write down in the summary all the books. And do you want to go through your presentation now, or is there anything
Yes,
else you want to
let's do
add?
that. Let's do that. Actually, I'm just going back in time to the early 2000s, the kind of experience I was telling about, which sort of started off this journey in a very big way for Rumana and others who were involved. It was a major turning point, I think. So let me just go through the slides and run through it very quickly. Okay, is
Yes,
that good?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, this
Okay.
is good.
So I had that background. I was talking about it. That's basically what I wanted to talk about: participatory action research paradigm and how to work with communities, together with communities. So, and that actually takes me to what I was discussing about participatory action research, the inclusivity, all, and mostly the synthesis of different knowledge streams, academic and indigenous knowledge streams. And basically, it's a people centered approach where people are supported with things like knowledge, technology, and all that, and building up their own confidence in whatever knowledge they have. And so I won't go into all of this, of course. Just it's not necessary. But a lot of these key proponents, and in my journey, when I was especially doing my PhD in the UK, I was strongly influenced by many of these writers, Chambers and Falconer and so on, and who actually talked about this participatory development paradigm. And if you go back further back in time, you see that whatever was known as development was done by experts and people and governments, people who had the resources and the money, but not the people who on the ground who were actually the so-called participants in this process. So the first case study I'm going to talk about it's basically participate action research. We call it building for safety in rural areas of Bangladesh. There you can see Rumana beginning to use a trowel. And if I may, if Rumana, if you will allow me, I can say that when they went to the field the first time, uh, they didn't know what a trowel actually did, and soon they became experts in using it. And also, the perception was that yes, our professor is taking us to the field, we'll be doing research, we'll be looking at things, documenting and stuff. But they didn't realize that this actually involved us in getting involved and doing stuff with our own hands, doing construction together with villagers, as is one of them, and immersing ourselves in that. So that was, I think, a revelation for the researchers who accompanied me in this journey, including Rumana. So here we were, we actually did part of that research which I was alluding to, in terms of trying to understand the community, but again, doing things in a very different way. We would talk to them, say that, can you map your area, tell us which are the most vulnerable areas, vulnerable to flooding. They would work on the ground using a stone chip or a brick chip to draw it. So things like that. So this particular community they worked on, this was what they call in Namal community, in the Hindu community in Bangladesh. First, is a minority, and even within the Hindu community, this was a lower caste community. So, as a minority within a minority. So, it just basically isolated in this particular area, and yet they face all kinds of pressures in terms of hazards as well as social marginalization. So, we chose to work with this community in this area. This is in Gopalganj district, and then we actually eventually this drawing that they did, we transferred it onto a drafting table and produced housing map of the village, and you can see what the village looks like. It's surrounded by low-lying land. Even now, it's a bit like that. And typically, they had these raised homesteads where they would build their houses and settlements, and when it gets flooded, whole area gets, goes underwater, and when it dries, then they have agriculture there. So you can see some of these ideas. That's a drawing I did of that kind of settlement pattern. Isolated mounds with low-lying land around it, and this is something that we enjoyed understanding and realizing it. So then we started looking at some of the housing, and you can see that is the house of one of the proponents of this project, Gopal, who worked very closely with us, and he was a brick mason. And I was actually doing some family building in that village in Gopalganj. Gopalganj happens to be my home district. And so I met him there, and he said, would you like to come to my place?" I was interested. So I asked him, can you take me to your village? I'm interested in rural housing. He said, all right. And at that time, it was the wet season. And so the whole fields were flooded. And I'd never actually waded through waist deep water to go anywhere. But he was doing it on a day to day basis, every day in the morning and every day in the evening. And so here I was. I took my plunge and started experiencing it. And I think some of these photographs can show you. You can see some of the housing in that village. But interestingly, this is another a project from another village where we also worked previous to this project, where you can see the areas were completely flooded in the 2004 floods, which I mentioned. I think, Rumana, you can recognize Asia and Muksud here.
Yes, and I remember I also did a presentation about that in my master's to Paul Oliver about, how people live in flood-prone areas and everyone owns a boat. It's a normal way of life.
Yeah, yeah. And this, bridge, this impromptu bridge made out of bamboo. That's how they
Yes.
go back and forth from their homestead. Yeah. Okay. So there you go. And then we started doing things a bit more formally, doing the workshops. We'd get the men and the women in separate groups because, that's how it is there. It's a structured society. The women won't talk if the men are there, and the men actually go to work very early in the morning. So we had to do the workshop with the women after the men left, and very early morning workshop with the men. And essentially, we started finding out what the kind of constructions they have and what kind of innovations that we can introduce there together with their consultation, good points, bad points, and so on. I won't go through it, but you get the idea that these were sort of the outputs from the workshops that we did. And based on that, we started. This is actually a drawing from a previous. This the one on the right is from the previous project in Manikanj district. But you see, that's the kind of thing that we did. I'm sorry, the drawings aren't very good. I kind of dug out some very old files and tried to show it. But basically, you can see the main idea is to cap the typical earthen plinth with a layer of cement stabilizer. It's just a very small amount of cement, 5 to 8% added to the local soil. Check the sandy content. That was one of the technicalities of it, but we kind of tested it, and then you layer it, and it gives resistance to flooding, even if it goes underwater for extended periods. And introducing things like cross bracings and also a rainwater gutter because the water would fall from the roof eaves and damage the ground and create furrows. And so this rainwater would also be used to get arsenic-free water supply because arsenic contamination is a problem in Bangladesh. Now, these houses may seem quite modest, and remember what I mentioned about the UNDP program when I was giving you an introduction, is that these are not absolutely foolproof, disaster resilient rather housing. These are examples of improving what they have so that they can afford it and they can achieve it. So that was the kind of idea behind it. So that's what we did, and you can see that in that photograph, that is the house that sorry, that was the house that uh, they had, and then we upgraded to kind of this kind of situation. And there you see there's the rainwater gutter, and we're doing the flooring, the capping of the floor, and then subsequently there's the house. That's what it looks like on the side. I'm not really very good with this. And then you can see here that in the other district, after the 2004 flood, there we go, and we see that there's that plinth, and nothing has happened to it in the flood. So the efficacy of that very simple innovation was evident. And we wanted to disseminate it. So we had a local folk singer. You can see him on the side, Ajit Roy, and he kind of composed a song, and he had his children's song team, and we had a great deal of fun doing it. Also, I would say, spending time with these local people, and they loved us. I can say that. There you go. You can see the community there, and some of these photographs show what we are doing. There's Rumana with her trowel, and there's the other assistant, Yasmin, who's also working on sieving the mud to get rid of the hard particles. There's the other researcher, Kabir, who also was working with us. And so you can see this is very much a hands on experience in working together with communities. Sounds great, right? Okay,
Yes,
so
it
now
brings all
let's.
the memories.
Yes, yes, and everything was good and everything seemed wonderful. So, few years later, I start going back and looking at them. And despite all those demonstrated advantages, no one replicated those ideas. They just kind of went and started building the same kind of thing. And look at this photograph on the right. The house on the right, you can see that is the capped earthen plinth, as you can see, and no problem. And the house next to it, his brother actually built his house, didn't follow that. And now he's facing trouble, so he's getting plastic sheets and covering it to protect it from water. So things like that. So we started asking, and they were very keen to build with brick and concrete, that they didn't want to go the intermediate way. So we asked them what the problem is. And they said, we don't have the money. You give us the money and we can build it. And I think part of it was our fault because we funded the construction of those demonstration houses. Not entirely because they provide the materials from their own old homes, which they dismantled, and all that. But then they were not replicating it. They were waiting for us to come in. So this is two things actually to us. One is that it needs a much more long-term engagement, not what we did for a few months working with them and kind of trying to inspire them, and every time just going back to our own comfort. And and they continued living the same way that they did, and they never kind of believed in the whole transformational approach that we kind of try to propagate and advocate. So that was one. The other one is, of course, funding. Whatever little innovation, they need funding for it. And once we show that there's availability of funding, that kind of destroys the initiative to seek funding on their own, and they would not do that. So big issues. So there you go. And this is in the same village a couple of years ago, much later, more than 20 years now. And there you see the kind of houses that they're building, two-story houses using brick and so on. But the vulnerability and the poverty still exists, as you can see in this kind of condition. The new problems have started coming and besieging these villages. For example, you see the waste that is being generated, plastic waste from the modern urbanization process. When we went there, we hardly saw so much of it. There was still some of it, but not so much. Now this is proliferated everywhere in Bangladesh, and there's actually no waste management system that can support these people to manage their solid waste. So these kind of issues. Now that's Gopal. After 20 years, the person who kind of originally took me to his village, that's his home. He already had a brick home, but he kind of added an upper floor to it. So you see the kind of gradual prosperity that's happening in these communities. But the ideas that we had, they were not taken on board. Except I found one house when they were using cross bracings. The idea that we can
Yes.
introduce because of the wind pressure. So I think some things did remain after all, but not the bulk of it. So my reflection on this is that basically what we are doing to people in these communities is that we've been giving them handouts, and for over years we have kind of destroyed their self-initiatives, and the relationship between institution and community is distorted, and therefore a kind of us and them sort of patron client relationship that has kind of developed, and it is being perpetuated because of this kind of paradigm. And the rural urban in country disparities, this is basically a macrocosm of the global north south relationship, the kind of disparity that happens across the world and within countries, even in countries like the UK and Australia, there's this kind of disparity. and globally, and this is also reflected in global south countries like Bangladesh. And this socioeconomic disparity, and as I said, that we would work with them, but then eventually go back to our own comfort zone, more durable homes, air conditioned, or at least having some form of ventilation and food prepared by people for us. So the change agents, as we started thinking of ourselves, we have a large disparity with the people that we work with, and and so eventually, like I said, we had a lot of fun. We felt great, but this kind of participation, it started making us feel good. It benefits us in the sense that we get kind of satisfaction that we are doing something good. So eventually, the bottom line for this kind of thinking is that we need to change ourselves before we can start thinking of them, if there is an us and them which has already been developed through this patron client relationship. Right, I'll stop there, Rumana, on this presentation. We can have a discussion if you want.
Thank you, sir. That was really good.
Would you like me to stop sharing and have a
Yes, and then we can see ourselves again. That's a really beautiful slide in the end.
thank you.
This is it. When I went back after 5 years to Manikganj, and people, Yasmin and me, we were still saying that nothing has changed. People think, yeah, oh, these are the people who came and gave us the house. No matter how much we banged on about, oh, this is participatory, you contributed, but the mindset, development mindset, we are the experts, we are the professionals, and we go and try to do something and then win awards or write publications. But yes, and another revelation for me was that when we first went, they always asked really directly, so what is your gain in this? Why did you come here to help us? So they were very straight cut and clear to know why we are there. Because we said, oh no, we are not an NGO, we are not giving you any charity or aid, but still they had their question, why are we doing this? And of course we were doing this because it was our passion, we wanted to pursue a career. But then again, you mentioned about us, how can we change us? It's This is why the Mars Mantra podcast, it's about my Mars Mantra, what do I want to get out of this world, and how can I contribute myself to make the world a better place? And you also mentioned a bit about the climate change, and people's way of life. They are okay to live with water up to the knee level, but it's rising. And what future do you see?
Yeah.
How can we go forward and learn from all the things we have discussed so far?
No, that is very true, but it kind of also, the point that you mentioned when they asked us what you gained from it, we couldn't explain ourselves because our position was incomprehensible for them. What is research? Why do you conduct
Exactly.
research? Now, for me, conducting research is to generate knowledge, and knowledge which can eventually feed into policy and practice. If that's
Exactly.
uh, easy way to say it, this is impossible for to explain to people there. So we never actually offered an explanation which made sense to them. We couldn't. So there's a communication gap as well somewhere, and how do you bridge that gap? So of course they would wonder, why are these urban people, well off, middle class Bangladeshis, coming to us and trying to do this? Surely they must have some profit motive.
Of
They must
course.
be gaining something. Some people say that you're taking these photographs and selling them to foreigners. That's why you come here. Someone said that to us. Why are you taking these photos? And of course, we had not followed any ethics protocols at that time because they are non existent in Bangladesh. We went and took photographs of people, we interviewed them, we talked to them, we did nothing. But now we look at it, we couldn't have done that. I wouldn't be able to do it. In my current position, I wouldn't be allowed to go there and do it. The work that we did in Bhasanchar, and I insisted to Yvonne that please get an ethics approval from Brack University before you go there and, do this. Otherwise, we will be taking advantage of these people and we'll benefit from it in our research, but they'll get nothing out of it. So, big issues, yeah, big issues. I don't know the answers really. We try, in whatever capacities we have been trained in a certain way to do things in a certain way, and we carry on. But at the end of the day, in the wee hour of the night, when you lie back and you think, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? And why am I doing it? Is it for my career? Is it for my job? Is that why I'm doing it? So that is a question that keeps on plaguing at least me.
You are so right, and because I lived and worked in many of these countries, and Indonesia, Pakistan, and Haiti. Haiti was a big shock for me because Indonesia, Pakistan, I could blend in because of the, because they're Asian countries. But Haiti, I found it very shocking because people were fed up. They were really angry when you get your camera out and try to take photos of these people. And especially, the ethics part, I think that we totally disregard and disrespect people when they're, sometimes we call it disaster tourism, trying to earn a living out of people's misery. If we do feel guilty, and also when we came back from these field works, it is really hard for us to blend in, and that's why we used to have that disturbance, that why, what are we doing, because we belong to a middle class society, and then all this professional part, and how do we bridge the gap. But the positive thing, the way I try to make sense as a change maker, is that at least we can bring in the voice of the people and present it as it is, the reality, because a lot of these research documents, and it's all recycling. X said this, Y said that, but we did it firsthand. We collected the real stories and the reality of the people, and try to, like you mentioned, to try to influence the policies as much as we can.
No, you're right. And interestingly, I mean, even in Haiti, I had to actually delete my photographs in front of people. They just came and I would have got beaten up, you know.
Yes.
And so, and Haiti, of course, was a shocker. I had to have a driver to guard me wherever I go. I couldn't just go out of the hotel and wander by myself. So it was dangerous. And rightly so. I mean, and Haiti was, of course, a very corrupt country, the poorest country in the Northern Hemisphere, and suddenly hit by this earthquake, and then everyone was there. And I know people, an American, he was telling me that, oh, Haiti, we can, fix the country easily. And I was thinking, like, yeah, instead of wearing a shoe, just cover the earth with leather. That will solve the problem. That is the kind of approach they have. And the other thing I wanted to say, Rumana, is also while we were doing it, of course, we thought we blended it with those people in the village because they were very kind and cordial, but we didn't actually. But then when we would come back to our urban milieu, we won't blend it there as well.
No,
So we were
exactly.
just caught in between. The kind of stuff that we would say didn't make sense to anyone. What we did, people would be asking me, "Oh, where did you study?" I said, "In America." I said, "In the UK." And what are you doing now? I go to villages and build homes with people. It doesn't make any sense to anyone in Dhaka, for that matter. And so so where were we? We were somewhere in the middle, and in some kind of netherland, with no understanding of what's happening wherever, no blending, no acceptance on any side. So I think it became a very, very difficult time, at least for me, to exist in Bangladesh in that kind of condition, in limbo, not belonging anywhere, neither with the people who I kind of you know, identify socio-economically, neither with the people to where my heart is in the villages. So no, nowhere. There's no place.
Exactly. And you rightly put it across. And when I work in Bangladesh, I find this the hardest because I'm a Bangladeshi and I am living outside Bangladesh for 22 years. So I find it really hard to belong, blend in. And same here. I mean, I just professionally, when I'm working overseas, I don't think, I just do what I can do, try to focus on your goal and try to achieve what you're asked to do. And in terms of social blending, I think that this is a common problem, not just blending. You mentioned about the dependency culture. Even in the uh, developed world, people live on benefits. So dependency is something, it's not just first world, third world problem. It's everywhere. So
And
on that
interestingly,
note, yeah,
also, well, there's one more point I really like to say because this is what you wanted to talk about. You want to talk about the architecture profession. You are an architect. I'm an architect, and even with that criteria is not being fulfilled. Like that UNDP project I did, people would say, "You're an architect. Where are the designs? Where's the house designs? Architects design houses. What are you doing?" So I don't know what I'm doing. I now work in the School of Architecture and Built Environment. I don't do any architecture. I don't teach in architecture. I talk about shelter. I talk about processes. I talk about policies. I talk about initiatives that kind of help people gain some kind of empowerment. That architecture. So I can't even fulfill the criteria for that also. So basically, getting alienated from all the domains, the middle class Bangladeshi society, the at risk vulnerable communities, as well as the profession to which we dedicated our education life. So, phew.
That's why we are from the planet Mars.
Yeah, good, good. That is a good
But
name.
this is why I wanted to talk to you. And it is all, my podcast is coming nearly to an end, and I think this episode is specially focused on reflecting and how what we have learned over the last 20, 30 years and how the whole development scene is changing. So I really appreciate the way you summarized it. Thank you very much. And is there anything else you would like to say, or
Oh, that's
final words
great.
to our listeners?
Yeah, I hope it resonates with your listeners. I'm sure some of them, or hopefully many of them, will have very similar experience to the kind of trajectory we define and the kind of position they find themselves in increasingly over time in this changing world. So I hope it resonates with them. That's all. That's my message.
Yes, and also when we looked back, it was we were aliens, but I think there are more aliens now. A lot of young people, a lot of professionals are taking this sector really seriously, and people are questioning about their own motives as well as trying to be more sensitive. I think that's the positive note I want
Yeah,
to
that's
end
a
in. Yeah,
positive note.
whatever you do,
Perhaps,
reflect.
and perhaps we can say that whatever we did had some impact. It kind of eventually initiated this kind of stream, which is now becoming much more acceptable. So perhaps, what we did wasn't entirely in vain. We did manage to start something in some way. Of course, it transformed itself. It has its own energy and own course of doing things, but nevertheless, it had to start somewhere. And I think I would still say that before we started that in Bangladesh in terms of architecture, very few people kind of, paid any attention to these issues.
Yes, thank you very much. I guess it's very late now for you.
It's 8 o'clock, so I better go and let you go as well and get on with your day. And thank you so much, Ivana, for inviting me.
Yes, it
Good
is
to
my
talk to
pleasure to have.
you.
It's good to reflect and to enjoy that those slides, especially when I had long hair to blend in. Thank you. Have a good evening.